News Talk 1090, WKBZ.
Welcome. You're listening to the Renegade River Show, and my name is Mike Hewitt. We'll begin with the quote for the day. Every step we take towards making the state our caretaker of our lives, by that much more we've moved towards making the state our master. And that was President Dwight Eisenhower. Our guest today is John Yabb, who's a Republican strategist, and he's the CEO of Strategic National. John, welcome to the Renegade River Show.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me on today.
Good. Hey, John, I've got a handful of questions I want to run through, and I got to tell you, statewide, and maybe nationally, but definitely statewide, you were probably more in the know than anybody else on my email list for sure of what's coming up the pike, or at least just to take the state's temperature, if you will, politically. But let me begin here with some of the easy stuff. The Senate race coming up. I hear some folks asking the question, is it going to be real contentious on the Republican side? And probably there will be challengers, I would guess, but that'll be the same on the Democrat side also, won't it?
Yeah, I think so. It looks like both Debbie Dingle and Gary Peters are taking a look at it on the Democrat side, so they may work it out in advance, but right now it looks headed for a primary.
Okay, I would have guessed that there'd be a primary, and certainly on the Republican side there will be. You would agree with that?
I think so. These opportunities where there's an open Senate seat with a incumbent Republican governor running for re-election, and obviously a gubernatorial year where Republicans perform better rather than a presidential year, is really a opportunity that comes along once every 20 or 30 years. So I think you'll see more than one Republican taking a serious look at it, ultimately running in the primary.
I'm hearing names like Rogers and Land. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think Rogers and Land are both seriously taking a look at it. Justin Amash's name has been floated. He hasn't put that to the wayside yet, so I think he's still a possibility. I think a self-funder may still take a serious look at this race as well. In 2010, most folks hadn't heard of Rick Snyder at this stage of the contest, and so I think you may see sort of a surprise candidate emerge at some point in time. And then you'll have sort of another tier of candidates, possibly Rob Steele, who ran for Congress a couple years ago, and some other candidates as well, probably.
Okay. I had heard early on. Let me let me ask you. Here a couple of weeks ago, I had Saul Anusis on this show, and
my old friend.
Yeah, I like Saul. I've known him for a long time. He indicated that he's certainly kicking the idea around. What's your thought on a Saul Anusis candidacy?
I mean, Saul is a very talented communications guy, and so Saul could do well at probably whatever he wanted to take a stab at. But the fact remains that it's very expensive to run a statewide campaign in Michigan. He doesn't start out with any real name ID, and the polling numbers have been very, very low for him. So I think it's a big hurdle for him, but he's a talented guy, and I wouldn't put it past him.
Okay, for me, because I know most of these people, and at least on the primary side of this, it gets a little bit, awkward or whatever the right word would be, but trying to pick one of these guys, because all of the names that I'm hearing, at least of the people that I know, like Terry Land and Rogers, these are some good people.
We have a very, very good bench this time around. Sometimes when an opportunity like this comes up and you look at the candidates and you're choosing from a bunch of second-tier candidates, the reality is this time Republicans have a wealth of candidates to choose from, partly due to our success in 2010 that elected a lot of these folks, but partially because we just have a strong bench, and so Republicans will be happy, I think, with whichever nominee they get, and I think there'll be a primary that can appeal to a wide variety of the spectrum.
When I look at the Republican Party and where the questions have been coming from in terms of how volatile or how nasty or mean-spirited the primaries can be, actually both Democrat and Republican, but it seems on the Republican side is with the fractions that I hope are slowly starting to meld themselves back together, but when you look at the party in total with the Tea Party and the Christian right and the libertarian influx that's come in, and you may remember I was involved with the Republican Liberty Caucus for a number of years, which tends to be a little bit libertarian, although certainly not entirely libertarian. But are any of these names floating better than one or the other to try to get a handle or some foothold into each one of those sections?
I think ultimately our party will unite behind our nominee, unless it's somebody that's really unacceptable for one reason or another. I think our party will do a good job uniting. In 2010, as you know, we had a very spirited primary for governor. I was running Rick Snyder's campaign in that, and after that primary was over, all the other candidates and their supporters united and for the task at hand in beating Virgil Bernero in 2010. I think you'll see a similar thing this time around. You may see one segment of that group is a little more active, a little more excited, depending on who the nominee is. But I have faith that our party will unite.
Were you with the Pete Hoekstra involved in that race?
I was in the Senate campaign, not in the gubernatorial campaign.
Okay. Do you think he's a candidate again?
I don't think Pete's going to run this time around. I think Pete's a great guy who has a very strong base of support. If he chose to run in the primary, I think he'd probably be the front runner. He has statewide name ID. He has a strong base of support in West Michigan. He's proven he can raise some money. So I think he'd probably be the front runner in the primary, but I don't think he's going to take a stab at it.
Okay, yeah, it's a grueling process. No question about it.
It really is, and he ran in 2010 and then again in 2012. So I think it's time. I think he thinks it's time to do something else.
Yeah, I'll kick myself slightly a little bit here. I began a race in 2010, and I got stopped by some heart difficulties, physical difficulties. But having said that, in my short month-and-a-half long candidacy, I saw the Muskegon Chronicle that referred to me as a serial candidate. And so I'll poke myself in the eye with that one, but people run the risk of having that.
Yeah, no, that's true, and Pete does have quite a few victories too, but that is very true.
Yeah, it can be tough, and the other thing is that I don't want to get ahead of myself, but you mentioned you're being involved in Snyder's candidacy. Do you think he's going to get primaried?
I don't. In Michigan, it's quite hard to get on the statewide ballot. It either takes a huge grassroots army, not just a few supporters, but literally a huge grassroots army to get the hundreds of thousands of petitions that are necessary, or it takes a significant amount of money. So, it's an uphill battle for somebody who isn't well known to get on the ballot. It either takes money or literally an army, and I don't anticipate that happening. The polling data also shows that Republicans are pretty united behind him. I mean, there's a few Tea Party folks here or there that complain about this or that at an activist level, but by and large, when you look at the Republican primary voters, primary data, he's simply not vulnerable. Even if there was a credible candidate, that candidate wouldn't face much chance because Rick's numbers are through the roof among Republicans.
Yeah, I got to tell you, for me, as my own, just to interject the ideology side of this, has been a mixed bag for me. In general, I support him, but what caused me to wonder about the primaries, frankly, he's got some senior citizens across the state pretty darned upset with him with what they perceive as an attack on their incomes.
Yeah, well, Rick does what's right regardless of political consequence. And in that case, he was spreading out the burden because they weren't at that point participating in the process. And so, no matter what you think of that, you got to give the governor credit for doing what he thinks is right, regardless of political consequence. And across the board, those decisions are moving Michigan in the right direction. We're creating jobs, and we've turned the corner. Okay,
that makes sense. Now, back where I left off on the Senate race with Amash, how do you think the Amash thing, if he does decide to jump in, is he the kind of candidate that could draw the libertarian side of the Republican Party together with the Christian right?
He's an interesting candidate. From a primary perspective, he's phenomenally strong, in my opinion. From a general election perspective, it's very interesting because, libertarians, the libertarian movement as well as anyone, and libertarian-minded Republicans often talk about being able to appeal to disaffected Democrats who maybe aren't happy with the direction that the Democrat Party is moving. But it hasn't really been tested yet. And so with like Rand Paul in Kentucky and Ted Cruz in Texas, They've done very, very well, obviously, but those aren't blue states. And so if Amash runs and he becomes the nominee, then it's going to become a national sort of litmus test, or a national test for can libertarian candidates appeal to disaffected Democrats in blue states. If the answer to that question becomes yes, then you're going to have a lot of people taking a serious look at Rand Paul for president, because people will argue that he can appeal to disaffected Democrats in states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin. If Amash does win the nomination, but then isn't successful in the general election, then people will take a look at Rand Paul's presidential campaign and say, well, yeah, but the liberty-minded candidate tried to run in Michigan and couldn't quite pull it off. So I think it really puts the pressure on Rand Paul's presidential campaign.
Makes me wonder whether Rand Paul would be encouraging or discouraging to Justin.
Yeah, I think that they're pretty tight, and so my assumption is that he's encouraging him, but I don't have any specific information on that.
When I look at both of those men, at least ideologically, they may or may not have the charisma of Reagan, but to me, their ideological foundation is set in the same stone that Ronald Reagan's was.
Yeah, that they're the leader of a new sort of ideological movement, and those things come around, once every, couple decades. And so it's very interesting what they're doing. I give them all the kudos in the world. They're true to their principles, and as a result, folks are following them. So I give them a tremendous amount of kudos, and I think they're doing an excellent job.
Do you think that the Tea Party and the Libertarian Republicans are going to be able to work together behind one of these, for instance, in the case of Amash?
Well, it's an interesting question, because there are issues that will come up that will divide folks. For the last few years since the Tea Party movement came about in 2010, there's been sort of this teaming up between social conservatives, libertarians, and Tea Party folks based on being sort of anti-establishment against what's perceived to be a more moderate national GOP establishment. The social conservative folks came in with Pat Robertson in 1988. The Tea Party folks came in more recently, and the Libertarian folks came in more recently. But they are two different sort of sets of people. Now, as different social issues come up, whether it's like Amash having some challenges with right to life, or whether it's the gay marriage stuff being talked about now, those coalitions are going to be tested. And it's going to be interesting to see whether those specific issues divide folks, or whether this sort of new spectrum of establishment versus anti-establishment wins out, and they're able to hold those coalitions together.
I'm reminded when you're talking, John, a little bit of, and I mentioned earlier, the Republican Liberty Caucus, and one of the things that we had to do within RLC, frankly, to be able to grow it, was to stay away from social issues, because we had frankly, the body or the membership of RLC is made up of really the same voters we're talking about right now. And I identify differently, the grassroots people, not necessarily voters.
Sure.
But the issues like the abortion issue, it's not an RLC issue, because we didn't want it to be a wedge that hampered membership growth and our effectiveness on the issues that we could come together and be effective in moving.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I think that's playing out right now. They've teamed up for a few years, and now those relationships are going to be tested. I hate to ever compare us to the Democrat Party, but in some ways it's similar to what Democrats in Michigan have faced with different coalitions here in the state over the years. They've mostly been able to keep that together, but there's been times where their coalition has been tested as well.
Yeah, it's going to be fun, but I like I say, with RLC, I've watched that it can work. And so when I see these kind of things gel, I get a little bit of excited, because I know it can work if they move forward with the concept of liberty and not get lost in the woods on some of these. And I don't want to say they're side issues, but they're issues that we're not going to have an effect on one way or another.
Yeah. It's very important to understand that in today's world, political world, on the Republican side, or on the conservative side rather, there are two spectrums that we work from. Folks who took political science classes in college learned a lot about the ideological spectrum. Who's on the right, who's on the left, what issues make you on the right, what issues make you on the left, what issues make you in the middle, etc. But in reality, in today's conservative politics, there is a sort of anti-establishment versus establishment spectrum that in many ways is more dominant than the standard ideological spectrum. Most folks are relatively conservative these days. There's sort of different different levels of conservatism. But by and large, a lot of the fights are playing out on this new sort of establishment versus anti-establishment spectrum instead.
I agree, but I constantly try to throw caution to some of the folks that use those tests as a way to measure. And an example would be, my personal ideology fairly well from having worked with me before, and I get a kick out of it because I have, on a lot of occasions, been called establishment myself. So, me, come on, stop. So really, it's really a measure of how long a person's been a volunteer as to whether they're establishment or not. And I think that's a little bit of a slippery slope for us.
It definitely is, but it depends on how you define it. I mean, there's a difference between being in power and being establishment, or being a go along and get along guy and being establishment. So, Justin Amash could be in Congress for 6 more years, and unless he literally puts together a coalition big enough to take over the House on the Republican side, which is possible for that matter, but unless that happens, he's always going to be viewed as anti-establishment, because he's always going to be willing to do what he thinks is right and challenge the powers that be, versus maybe some other congressman who just votes with leadership every time.
Right. John, we've got to slip to a break, but do please stay with us, because I've got a handful of questions more for us to banter around.
Okay, sounds good.
We'll be right back. Thanks.
Renegade River in Spring Lake wants to buy your used handguns and hunting guns. Renegade River, your hunting, camping, and survival store. Stop in and check out their new and used firearms, sporting goods, Army and Navy supplies, and survival gear. Downtown Spring Lake, next to the police station. Be a survivor, not a statistic. Renegade River in Spring Lake has new and used handguns, hunting guns, sporting goods, and survival gear. Protect your rights and your freedom. Ask about their CPL classes. Renegade River, next to the police station at downtown Spring Lake.
The Talkin' Muskegon program can now be heard live every morning, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. here on News Talk 1090. This is John Van White.
And Brian Worsham. We will focus on community events, news, weather, and sports. We'll also bring you traffic updates, weekly segments like the Movies with Ron Van Timmeren, the Biker Report, and Lumberjacks. This is Talkin' Muskegon right here, 8 to 9 a.m. on the Talk of Muskegon, News Talk 1090.
News Talk 1090 is the Talk of Muskegon.
Welcome back. You're listening to the Renegade River Show, and my name is Mike Hewitt, and today we're on with John Yob, a Republican strategist and the CEO of Strategic National. Welcome back, John.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, when we left off, we were kind of kicking around a couple different issues we've got floating up in the air, but the Senate race itself, would you speculate we're going to end up with 3 or 4 candidates, or 2 big ones, or what would your guess just by history be for the primary?
I think you start from the perspective of likely having one that's from the more establishment wing of the party and one that's from the more Tea Party wing of the party. So I think you'll have at least sort of one candidate at least representing each of those sort of groupings. And then I think you'll probably add in another candidate or 2 beyond that. And the field really matters in terms of who has what chances of winning. In 2010, the field had several sort of long-time politicians, if you will, and then had Rick Snyder, the outsider. Being the only outsider gave him a big edge. Now, he won by 9 points anyway, so it turned into a sort of a blowout of sorts. But regardless, throughout that campaign, it gave him an edge because he was the one outsider in that group. And I think in the Senate race, I would look towards a similar thing. Who takes up what space in the field, and how many candidates are there taking up that space?
Rogers and Land would both be considered establishment.
I think that Rogers would be considered certainly probably the most establishment. He's head of Intel right now. He's voted that way. There's some votes that the Libertarians don't like so much in that regard. Land, I think she had strong support from Tea Party folks when she ran at the state convention. So although she's been around a while and has proven herself in terms of winning elections, having won with the biggest open seat margin in a generation in 2002, that said, she had some pretty strong Tea Party support when she upset Holly Hughes at that state convention, so I'm not sure exactly where to place her.
Yeah, it's a fascinating mix, and of course, if Justin Amash gets in, he'll be a Tea Party, Libertarian Republican side of that. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And he'll have a very strong base of support, and he'll have a lot of energy, and some of the national sort of Tea Party Libertarian groups coming in to support him if he's to run. So he'll be a strong candidate, but he'll also have some challenges on some of the social issues where groups like Right to Life and others and the NRA aren't real fond of some of the votes.
Okay. How much of an impact will it have on this race on the general side of the question, given that it's a non-presidential year?
It'll have a massive impact. I would say it puts our odds as Republicans of winning from about 30% to about 50%. In a presidential year, it's just really, really hard for Republicans to win statewide races. In a gubernatorial year, we may even have an edge, especially with an incumbent governor running for re-election.
Right, and I think we've had, 3 since the end of World War II?
Yeah, something like that. But the last time that the stars aligned quite like this was in 1990, and Spence Abraham was able to pull it off. I'm sorry, 1994. Yeah.
Now, without not trying to bash Spence, but actually he's been kind of in the back of my mind through this. What I can see what caused him to win or helped him to win, but what caused him to lose in his very first challenge?
Well, I think you just nailed it in the comment before, which is the gubernatorial versus presidential year. He won in 1994 when things were lined up just like they are today, with an incumbent governor running for re-election. Engler had won in 1990 and was running for re-election in 1994. There was an open seat, and Spence, ran the primary against Ron Romney and then won a general election. Fast forward to 2000, it was a presidential election year. Although Bush won the presidency, he didn't win the state, obviously. Al Gore won the state, and therefore Spence wasn't able to be successful. So, there are people who talk about some of the mistakes that Spence may or may not have made in that campaign. But regardless, it's very, very hard for a Republican to win statewide in Michigan in a presidential election year.
So when we look at Hoekster's results, they were almost predictable when he opposed Stabenow.
It was always a very, very uphill battle because it was the presidential year and because Stabenow was a relatively popular incumbent.
Yeah, and that just mystifies me. It really does. When I put my ideology hat back on, I just don't see any redeeming qualities for her.
In order for Pete to win that campaign, he would have needed Romney to really overperform in Michigan, and Romney didn't put up much of a campaign here. He didn't run any TV ads at all. And so when the Romney campaign didn't really participate here, then it really closed the door on Hoekster's campaign.
Statistically, John, if it, I don't know if this is wrong or right, so correct me, but if, let's say it came down to, and I'm just picking some names for the sake of a question, but if Land were to rise up against an establishment candidate or someone that was let's say she's backed by the Tea Party group and the Libertarians and somebody else. I've always kind of been told or thought of that if all things were equal, if it's a female and a male running, the female is going to win. Is that a truism or no?
Well, in the consulting world, we think that all things held equal, a female usually has about a 3-point edge. That's all things being held equal. And so, females do tend to be better candidates on the ballot. And so when a popular female with a history of winning elections offers herself as a candidate, smart voters really need to take that seriously.
That's because in the reason behind it is that there are more female voters, or what drives that?
Well, that's a good question. I think there are more female voters. I think ticket splitting independents are a little more likely to vote for a female. I think there's a wide variety of reasons for that.
Okay, and I obviously I don't have a crystal ball, and I certainly have no inside knowledge, but I'm assuming that Terry Land will be a candidate, and at least from all of the tea leaves I'm trying to find and read.
From the quotes that you read in the press, it seems that that's a strong possibility.
Yeah, that would be the direction she's. And I consider Justin Amash a friend, but he's not showing his cards whatsoever. Do you have any inside knowledge there, John?
Nothing that I can relay, but from the words in the press, it seems that he's taking a look at it, but he's not in a big hurry to decide.
Okay, one of the things as a Tea Party guy myself and a libertarian leaning Republican, when I look back at Governor Snyder's race, and I know you were on the part of the Snyder team, but one of the things that when I look back at it from my distant role in it, just as a voter, it looked like Cox and Bouchard and all of those folks had kind of divided up the conservative vote and allowed Mr. Snyder to walk across the finish line. Now, was that a truism from the reality point of view, or is that just my perception?
Well, that was certainly the perspective up until Election Day, but the reality is Election Day was a blowout. And you had a 5-way race where he won by 9 points. So there's a lot more to it than that. And the reality in the exit polling and in the polling in general is that Snyder actually won conservative voters. He actually won Tea Party voters.
Right.
He didn't necessarily win the Tea Party activists that are quoted in the paper, but the reality is he won Tea Party voters.
Yeah.
And I would come back again to that sort of anti-establishment versus establishment spectrum. You can appeal to some voters these days, not just on the ideological spectrum, but sort of on the throw the bums out spectrum. Do you like the way things are going or not? And do you want to try something new?
Right. Yeah. And that's certainly. I'm wondering how that will impact names like Rogers and Land that are so well known, especially Terry Land.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's something that candidates have to take into account. Certainly when outsiders step up to the plate, if they have the resources to run, they need to be taken much more seriously these days than they were a decade ago.
Somewhere recently I saw that you'd kind of defined the Republican Party as being of four groups. Did I see that correctly?
Yeah, I would say that's right. In today's world, you've got the libertarians, you've got the social conservatives, you've got the Tea Party folks, and then you've got the more establishment-minded Republicans.
And in your mind, an establishment-minded Republican is a person that tries to be pretty moderate and go along with whatever the centrist position is, or?
They tend to be a little more moderate. Generally, they tend to be more follow the leadership kind of folks, and so they may come from different parts of the spectrum, but they tend to be more, I would say, unity-driven and sort of follow the leadership types.
Okay, well, that's. It seems to. The reason I'm asking those questions again is I'm trying to mechanically put together in my mind how a guy, a consulting firm or a candidate either can try to bring together at least 2 or 3 of those four legs. We all know how Ronald Reagan did it, but how would one of these other guys do it is kind of my driving curiosity there.
That's what defines Republican primaries today, and if you figure that out, you can probably make a lot of money doing it. But it's that's what drives politics. It's really interesting, from 1980 on and maybe before, you had this sort of more movement conservatives, they called them in those days, and then more moderate Republicans. In Michigan, they called them Milliken Republicans, and maybe Engler folks, and nationally, Bush Republicans and Reagan Republicans. And then in '88, Robertson brought in sort of these new social conservatives who Reagan had also electrified a little bit, but they weren't organized as a faction so much until 1988 when Robertson did it behind his presidential campaign. And then you had sort of the more social conservative folks fighting with the more moderate folks, and now rather than playing with a 2-dimensional spectrum, you've got a 4-dimensional spectrum to deal with.
The media would like to have us believe that the Republican Party is on the ropes and incapable of winning any kind of large elections. And when I look at the math, we've got I can't remember exactly, but 30 governors plus or minus, and almost as many state legislators. But what do you think when you look at the health of the Republican Party?
Oh, in Michigan, I think it's terrible. We only have the governor, the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, the Lieutenant Governor, the House, and the Senate. Oh, yeah, and the Supreme Court. So we're really on the ropes here. I feel terrible for us.
I love it, John.
Nationally, you're as good as your last election, and the reality is the Democrats came up with Barack Obama, who whether we like him or not, historically speaking, is a great candidate, and he did inspire a whole new group of people, both young people and independents, to participate in the process, and he kicked our butt twice because of it. And whether we like it or not, he did inspire people. and so you're only as good as your last campaign. And nationally speaking, Barack Obama was a tough competitor to go up against.
When you look, you were part of the McCain and the Romney campaigns. Is that true?
I was part of the McCain campaign. I was not really part of the Romney campaign. We did a tiny bit of work for him, but I was not a major component of the Romney campaign. But I was the national political director of the McCain campaign, so I was heavily involved in that one. What
do you suppose was the reason that 3 million less people voted for Romney than did McCain?
To me, we saw that first in the primaries. I did some work for quite a bit of work for Rick Santorum in the primaries. I was his delegate and convention director. And in the primaries, we saw that even when we were running very underfunded campaigns against Romney, we were vastly overperforming. Some of that was due to Santorum's appeal to social conservatives and to blue-collar folks. But some of it was due to Romney's somewhat weakness in terms of earning votes. And so, we saw it first in the primary, in terms of whether he was able to inspire turnout. You can say a whole bunch of things. Although I wasn't a Romney person per se, I do think he would have made a great president. But for whatever reason, he wasn't great at inspiring voters.
Yeah, he was pretty vanilla. I mean, there was almost no flavor. Now, during the primary, I was pretty actively against Romney, and what my reason was is he came across to me as Obamney. When I look at everything he had said previous to 2007, it was the same exact things that President Obama has been doing. So I had a tough time getting myself to believe that there was some political realignment on his part, and I wondered a little bit if that was the state of mind shared by others and caused such a great reduction.
Yeah, that may very well be, and in some cases, the best thing that ever happened in the McCain campaign was the summer of 2007 when literally the campaign almost went broke and he fired almost all of his key people, or they quit, whichever, in your perspective. And it went down to a very small core group of people. Now, although that gave us a lot of disadvantages in terms of what a big sort of bureaucratic campaign would have, it gave us a lot of advantages in terms of being able to be nimble and quick and operate quickly. And especially in functioning in states like Iowa and New Hampshire, South Carolina, we were a lot more nimble than they were. And so there's something to be said for having a campaign that can operate quickly and more freely versus a campaign that is very focused on not making any mistakes. If you're doing sort of a front-running campaign, a very insular campaign, you can have all the smartest people in the world on that campaign, but if you're running a prevent defense, a make no mistakes kind of defense, oftentimes that makes it difficult to inspire voters. And so whenever my college football team puts in the prevent defense, I get even more worried. I wish they just played the same way. and similarly in politics, when you start trying to play mistake-free football, it becomes difficult to inspire folks.
It's really not on the topic for the day, but I'm kind of curious since you were so involved in the McCain campaign. Which camp are you in? Was Sarah Palin a mistake, or was she a good idea?
Well, I was heavily involved in that, and at the tail end of the campaign, I think my dad, who was the national committee at the time, sent her a letter asking her to come campaign to Michigan. I think the public perception is such that I was strongly in Sarah Palin's camp.
Yeah, what I found fascinating about the power of the media. I happen to continue to still be a Sarah Palin fan, but what I found fascinating is her approval ratings when she was first launched were gigantic, but the 24/7 assaults on her, they had a huge impact on her favorability. It's like the interview that she did that she still, they're still teasing about it. But it was a couple-day interview, as I recall, and she made a couple gaffes during a couple-day interview. I sure as the heck wouldn't want to be held accountable for every single utterance over a 2-day period.
Yeah. I think she would have been a phenomenal candidate had she had more time to prepare. That was a decision that was made late, and she was thrown into it late, and therefore had little time to prepare. I think she would have been well served to maybe have another 2 years or so before being on the national stage. But that said, I think she's been a great inspiration to our party, inspired a whole heck of a lot of people, and did a lot, and had a lot to do with us winning elections in 2010.
From a consulting point of view, do you think she's got a political future?
she definitely has a political future, and these days, as you know, sometimes that means running for office, sometimes that doesn't. If she chose to run for president, as long as Iowa's first in the process, a strong conservative always has a great chance of being the nominee. From a U.S. Senate perspective, I think she'd be a strong candidate in Alaska this cycle. We ran some polling on that 3 or 4 months ago to try to sort of urge her to run a little bit. She didn't seem to bite, so I don't think she's going to run up there, but I think she'd be a strong candidate for Senate in Alaska as well.
Yeah, sometimes I have to laugh at myself, John. What was that Reagan that said if you humiliate yourself in politics, you can write a book? And so I wrote a book, and now I'm a talk show host, and that was my education in politics. But I hope she stays in the game, because I think she brings a certain element to politics that's important. Whether a person likes her or disagrees with her doesn't matter. That element has to be in the arena, in my opinion.
It does. There's 2 points I would make. One, she sort of defines that anti-establishment rhetoric and spectrum that I was talking about earlier. So there's certainly that, and she sort of has the bully pulpit, and unlike anybody else has, if she says something, she gets the microphone. No
question about it. John, we're going to go to a break, but what I'd like to do when we come back is to talk a little bit about the coming House and Senate race. If you'd stay with us, I'd appreciate it.
Sounds good.
Very nice. We'll be back, everybody.
Shop Menards Project Day sale for great deals on lawn and garden supplies. Save big on trimmers, tillers, lawn seed, and much more. Grow a beautiful yard with Smart Seed Grass Seed by Pennington. With no filler, it has twice the seed compared to coated grass seed products. Cover up to 1,000 square feet with a 3-pound bag of Sun and Shade Smart Seed by Pennington, just $9.99. Menards, your lawn and garden savings place.
Save big money at Menards.
Jim is 38, mortgage, married, 3 great kids. He wants to protect his family with a $500,000 term life insurance policy. What do you think it will cost him? $100 a month? 60? 40? Actually, none of the above. Jim is in excellent health and can get a 10-year, $500,000 policy through SelectQuote for under $19 a month. Jim's wife, Deirdre, 36 and also in great health, can get a 10-year, $500,000 policy for under $16 a month. See how much you can save.
For a free quote, call 1-800-947-5735. That's 1-800-947-5735. 1-800-947-5735. Or go to SelectQuote.com. SelectQuote. We shop. You save. Get full details on the example policies at SelectQuote.com/commercials. Your premium could vary depending on your health, issuing company, and other factors. Not available in all states.
Tammy has been pulled over. She's searching through her glove box for proof of insurance. Should she A, call an out-of-work superhero with X-ray vision, or B, use her digital ID card on Geico's mobile app? The correct answer is B. Geico's mobile app can pull up her proof of insurance faster than a superhero. Plus, X-ray vision can get embarrassing quick, and superheroes don't exist. Geico's mobile app is real, free, and available 24/7. It never sleeps.
Geico. Wherever, whenever. Just a click away with our free mobile app.
Ah, the sound of small business, getting busier. Can you tell which one is using AT&T? Truth is, they all are, because businesses of all kinds can find AT&T customizable plans that fit their exact needs. Whether it's broadband, mobility, or nationwide voice, at AT&T, we can help your business get humming.
I need more receipt paper, please.
Call 1-855-877-4288 today and ask about special offers available for new small business packages. AT&T, rethink possible.
Hi, this is Jim Riley, your host of Eye on Muskegon, every Sunday morning from 8:30 to 10 and on the internet at eyeonmuskegon.com. Politics can be aggravating and to some just plain boring, but our elected politicians are spending your hard-earned tax dollars and sometimes borrowing from your children to pay for it every day, even here in Muskegon. We'll continue our quest to expose the power that local power brokers and politicians have over you and your family this Sunday morning, 8:30 to 10 at Eye on Muskegon on Newstalk 1090 WKBZ, the Talk of Muskegon.
Fox News Radio, I'm Karen McHugh. A bipartisan proposal on gun control by Senators Toomey and Manchin that would require background checks at gun shows but not on private sales may break the impasse. One prominent Democrat says he's encouraged.
I can tell you this, when it gets down to it, we've got to ask the basic question. Should we try to keep guns out of the hands of felons and people so mentally unstable they shouldn't own a firearm? If the answer is yes, Manchin Toomey is a step in that direction.
Illinois Senator Dick Durbin on Fox News Sunday. Meanwhile, the GOP Senator John Cornyn thinks that more attention must be paid to the mental health of prospective gun buyers.
I'm focused like a laser on the mental health component.
He, too, was on Fox News Sunday. North Korea says the South's proposal to resolve their current dispute through dialogue is a crafty trick. Secretary of State John Kerry is wrapping up a diplomatic swing through Seoul, Beijing, and Tokyo to try and find a peaceful solution to the North's war talk. Fox News. We report, you decide.
Welcome back. You're listening to the Renegade River Show, and my name is Mike Hewitt. We're on today with John Yabb, a Republican strategist and the CEO of Strategic National. Welcome back, John.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, what I wanted to do is spend a little bit of time we got left just kind of getting a feel for the coming flavor of the few House and Senate races here in Michigan on a state legislative level. From what little I remember of my own race, it seems like of the 110 House seats that there probably were only 10 of them or so, plus or minus, that are actually pivotal, that the general election is going to tell you who the actual winner is. Is that kind of true or not so much? Or?
I would say that's right. And the other thing to keep in mind is the Senate is up this time, so we've got both House and Senate races. But I would say it's absolutely true.
Yeah, so just for listeners to make sure that I'm communicating that point well, is that if in a lot of, 100 or so of the 110 House seats, if you live in a Democratic community, whoever wins the primary is most likely, barring something really egregiously done, most likely that person will win the general. And likewise, if you're in a Republican community like Ottawa County, whoever's going to win that is in the primary is most likely going to go on to win in the general. So it leaves those 10 or so plus or minus House seats become very, very important, at least in my point of view. Is that, what's your take on it?
That's absolutely right, and they can get very expensive also as a result.
Right. I remember whining about my own expenses, but when I look at some of these races where they were a couple $100,000, is that right?
Oh yeah, they've gone upwards of $1 million before.
Yeah, for a state House seat, that to me is just incredible to me. And the position pays what, $79,000 and something like that, $78,000.
Yep, something like that.
It's hard to get my head around the idea of $1 million in a portion of a county, in terms of district size. What are you anticipating from the Senate race or the Senate side of that?
I'm not as much of an expert on the state legislatures as I am on some of these other races these days, because my company doesn't do as many of those races these days. But I'm confident that the Republicans will hold the Senate. There'll be 3 or 4 races that are highly targeted. We had such a good result in 2010 that we've got a few more seats to defend than we normally do. But I'm confident that we'll keep the majority.
Where are you looking on the statewide for any kind of movement for statewide office holders?
In terms of attorney general kinds of things?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I'm confident that Bill Schuette will be reelected. As you know, the lieutenant governor, attorney general, and secretary of state are nominated at convention rather than through a primary process. So conventions are unpredictable these days, as you know. But I'm confident that Bill Schuette will be renominated and then ultimately win the election and be a big player moving forward.
Yeah. Now the Democrat side, for them to arrive at a nominee, they're going through a similar process. Is that right?
They are going through a similar process, and they don't have a bench like we do. Earlier on the show, Mike, we talked about how we had such great candidates for U.S. Senate and this deep bench. Let's talk about the Democrats for a second. The Democrats have no candidate for governor. The Democrats have 2 candidates thinking about running for U.S. Senate, neither of which have stepped forward yet. The Democrats have nobody for attorney general yet. They have nobody for secretary of state yet. They're a party without a bench.
That's got to be a tough thing. They must have some people sitting around thinking, "I wonder if I should."
Yeah, Gretchen Whitmer, who actually went high school I went to in Grand Rapids a long time ago. But Gretchen Whitmer, who now lives in Lansing, is the Democrat leader, and she was positioning herself to run for governor, but she backed out a few months ago and sort of left them without a horse.
Okay. Wow. That it seems like they should be in scramble mode. How's the new chair of the Democrat Party?
He seems to be a well-qualified individual. Certainly his wife had a big role on the Obama campaign, and the Obama campaign was obviously a highly effective operation. So we take him very, very seriously. He comes from a little different part of the spectrum than Brewer did. Mark Brewer was the longtime chairman and was, in very tight with the unions and sort of came from that world. Lon Johnson comes from a little different world, being part of the Obama operation. So, we take him very seriously.
Yeah, that they certainly wouldn't want to let your guard down and pretend like they're nobody. Have you ever been to a Democrat convention? I'm only asking because I'm curious if they've got the same general atmosphere that the GOP does. Because I don't know.
I haven't been to one, but I've certainly read about them over the years, and they certainly have a lot of very active and vocal coalitions as well.
Well, kind of the reason I'm asking, aside from the fact I just simply don't know, but we hear a lot about the rancor and the vitriol that goes on in the Republican Party. And it seems like the media never reports on that, which must go on. I mean, it's got to go on within the Democrat Party also, but it just doesn't get reported on. Or I'm not seeing it in the media sources that I'm watching. Maybe I don't know.
It happens usually around convention time. I remember a few years ago, Bernstein from the famous Bernstein family was positioned to be Attorney General, and there was some discussion that Kwame Kilpatrick and Mark Brewer, moved things another direction, and somebody else ended up becoming the nominee. And so there's times usually right before their convention where some fights break out. But certainly Brewer did a pretty good job over the years of quieting that stuff down as much as possible.
Yeah, what's he doing nowadays? I was a little bit surprised by his ousting. So
yeah. There's some talk of him actually running for Congress against Sander Levin over there. There's no love lost between Mark Brewer and Sander Levin, so it wouldn't surprise me to see him start running for office over that direction in the state.
Yeah, for him to challenge one of his incumbents like Sander Levin seems like it'd be a monster-sized uphill battle.
Yeah, I think so, and I'm not sure he'd sort of go for the king right off the bat, but I'm sure we haven't seen the last of Mark Brewer.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but I hope he does that, because if he won, it would seem to make that district vulnerable.
Yeah, I know. We'd have to send a check.
I'm liking that idea, John. Oh, that's too funny. You're a consulting firm. Are you not going to have any state house or senate candidates in this coming cycle, or no?
I don't want to say that I'm absolutely not going to, but we don't. We didn't do any of those last cycle, and we probably won't do any this cycle. We even do very few congressional races, but we do a few here or there. We did Kerry Bentivolio's last time because of the interesting nature of it. But we mostly handle U.S. Senate and governor campaigns in Michigan around the country.
Okay. Now, just we touched on it off air a minute, but when you have a situation where we have 3 or 4 potential candidates coming up in the senatorial race, how do you decide which candidate you want to work with, John?
I have to agree with them on the issues in terms of an overall perspective. Not every issue, but if they're from a different part of the spectrum than I am, then I don't like to do that. That's one part. And another part is whether I think they can win and whether it fits with the times. In 2010, I had a tough decision to make because most of the candidates running for governor were either friends or clients or both. And I went with Rick Snyder because I thought he was the right guy for the times, even though I didn't know him real well before I got to know him as part of the campaign process. And so I take a look at the times and see what I think that our state or our country needs, and whether it fits with sort of my value structure and whether I have added value. Some candidates I have sort of more to offer than other candidates. And so I take a look at all of those variables and then make a decision.
Got to be tough when you know them all.
It makes it much more difficult. It does, and going through that a little bit on the Senate campaign right now.
When I first started in grassroots with politics, I remember talking to one of the county chairs who was talking about how he didn't make endorsements for local races, and in fact most state races he didn't endorse. And at the time I thought, wow, that's pretty gentlemanly and the right thing to do. But then as I've made endorsements, I found out there's another reason, because you take a lot of arrows once you jump in.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you certainly do.
Yeah, that's. What about the litmus test? Is there a way that the GOP? I talked about the vitriol and all that. Now I'm slowly trying to find a way. Is there any suggestions you might be able to make for a way to calm the litmus test down? And what I guess I'm getting at is, we'll use Snyder as an example. There are some issues I flatly don't agree with him on. On the other hand, I agree with him about 95% of the time. So when I'm reading Facebook or I'm reading Twitter or listening to the conservative media talk, where they're just absolutely trashing the guy, I'm thinking, I really don't agree with him on those 5%, but do I want to throw the baby out with the bathwater when I'm agreeing with 95%? So I'm asking you a little bit as a consultant, is there a way for us to wind some of that vitriol down?
Well, that's a good question. First, I would start from the perspective of, does it have any effect? The reality is the governor is a strong-willed person and is going to do what he thinks is best for the party, regardless of circumstance, and certainly isn't somebody that's going to be threatened by any coalition into changing his position. So I would start with that as a premise that it isn't going to have much impact. That doesn't mean he doesn't listen to both sides of the discussion and come to an informed conclusion. It just means that just because people raise the volume doesn't change the facts. So I would start with that. The other thing I would point out is that although he is a little more moderate in tone, and he wants to bring people together and stays positive through relentless positive action, etc., the fact of the matter is he's accomplished some great things. He got rid of the MBT that folks spent 6 or 8 years complaining about or more. They got a budget passed in record time when in previous years they were literally sleeping in the legislature trying to pass a budget. Actually, Michigan is now a right-to-work state. Think about that. Could you imagine 2 years ago, even a year ago, actually thinking that by now Michigan would be a right-to-work state? So, I would hope that conservatives would take a look at the overall success, and he's doing what he needs to do to turn Michigan around. All of us want Michigan to be a top-tier state, a state that our kids want to grow up in, and he's moving it in that direction.
No question about it. You talk about right to work. I remember attending meetings within the last year where they were talking about this will have to be a budget, a ballot proposal, and it's going to have to. They were forecasting years into the future for that to take place. So to your point, there's no question he marshaled that one, and I was frankly very pleased and surprised.
Yeah, he's accomplished some great things in a very short period of time, and I couldn't be prouder of him.
Yeah, last question for you, John. Lieutenant Governor Calley, any chance he'll be in the Senate race?
I don't think so. Brian is Lieutenant Governor Calley is a good friend of mine, and I have great respect for him. He's one of my very favorite people in politics, and would I think be successful at whatever he chose to run for. But they're finishing a job there, and he is a key part of the governor getting his agenda to the legislature. As you know, the lieutenant governor had experience in the legislature before, and part of the reason that the governor's been so successful is because he's had Lieutenant Governor Calley as a teammate. So, I don't think he's totally closed the door, but I don't think there's much chance that he's going to run for U.S. Senate.
Yeah, I asked only because I heard his name being bubbled around several times. And I was thinking, just as you just said, he was pretty doing an excellent job where he's at in terms of advancing the governor's, like it or not, but the governor's agenda. He's doing a good job for him.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And you got to also sort of understand where the governor comes from. The governor is there to do a job, and he doesn't view things through a political spectrum like most politicians do. And so, I think that he's going to want his lieutenant governor to be working hard right by side with him.
No question. John Yob, we've got to wrap it up, but thank you very, very much for coming on the Renegade River Show.
No problem, Mike. Thanks for the opportunity, and let's stay in touch.
Very nice. Thank you, sir. Thank you, listeners. We'll talk to you next Sunday.